Welcome to my tech talk about are internet users at risk? My name is Thomas Diebendorfer and I work as a software engineer in Google Zurich. So today I will give a close look at vendor patching performance and web browsers in daily use, because by judging who is using which web browser version and how fast the vendors are patching, we can give some estimate about the risk. First of all, we will look at web-borne threats. So what threats are there when you browse the internet? And why are there millions of web pages which attack their visitors? I will do so in two studies. First study, where I was a co-author, is about understanding the web browser threat. So here we try to measure how many internet users surf the web without the latest fully patched version. And in the second study, I will talk about a zero-day patch metric, which will help to judge on how good a job vendors are doing for patching a known vulnerability. And specifically, I will look at Microsoft and Apple. So let's start with web-borne threats. Why are there millions of web pages that attack their visitors? Let's look at some web pages, like the web page of the Department of Homeland Security, the one of United Nations, the one of UK Civil Service, or at FunChat Vacations, or even a blind dating service such as howaboutLunch.ch. Or finally, support knowledge base by TrendNet. What do all those web pages have in common? What they have in common is very sad, I would say, because they all got hacked in April 2008. They were not the only pages that got hacked in April 2008. There were another 510,000 web pages that also got hacked with the very same attack vector. There was an ASP script that allowed to inject data into a SQL database by using a SQL injection attack. And if you look at those screenshots, you can see that alone on unitednations.org, if you search with Google for the exploit script that was inserted through the attack, you find 384 web pages, distinct web pages on unitednations.org that had apparently been hacked. Or you can go to dhs.gov, as the screenshot at the right top side here shows. And in the address directory there, apparently somebody was able to insert a script tag which would subsequently download some malicious code from some third-party website. And the same happened to the other pages I mentioned. So let's look at one specific malicious web page that also got hacked through a different exploit vector. It looks like a normal web page. I blanked some information that would lead to the actual address because I don't want people to go there just because of the attack. But when you look at this web page, it looks very normal to you. There's a navigation bar, some information, some images, nothing very suspicious. However, at the end of this website, there's an iframe injected, which is invisible. What does this mean to the user? It means you cannot see it. However, the browser, specifically if you use IE in version 6 for this page, the browser will still read the information from this iframe, even though it is hidden to the user. And if you look at the source of the iframe, it just apparently downloads something from a third-party website, which most probably the webmaster of the website that you see on the left has no clue about that this is actually happening. And from this third-party website, there's some malicious code being downloaded that will then subsequently attack the user's browser. So I went on this web page with IE6 on June 11th, 2008, and guess what happened? My web browser got attacked by this third-party website, and about a dozen malware components were actually downloaded and installed on the computer. First of all, a Trojan, which is actually a dial-up program that reconfigured the internet access to go through a dial-up phone line. So if you happen to have a modem then you would now have a new number that would be much more expensive than your other provider. And in addition, the attacker actually can log all your traffic. Furthermore, it was reported that this Trojan actually will also sometimes redirect you to porn sites once you're surfing, because they can do some mangling with the DNS system if you are dialed up through their own systems. However, this wasn't enough. So if you don't have a modem, this wouldn't be of much concern. However, there were more components installed, like the Guru Inc. PK-BP component, which is a keylogger. So each and any character you will type after having visited this website and having been infected would be logged and finally be sent to some attacker somewhere in the internet. And there's even more Trojans that were downloaded, like the malware downloader -O and the guru-tips pk-xx, as they are called by Sophos. They're Trojans for Windows, and they can download any arbitrary code on your computer and run it. So basically, this is an open door. The attacker can now control your computer by running an arbitrary executable that he lets your Trojan download. And there were even more such agents. Another one, the Trojan-agent-gww, which would call itself taskmon.exe and start with each start of Windows. So you would actually never get rid of it, because each time you reboot, you will have it launched automatically. However, this wasn't everything. In total was more than a dozen such malware components that were installed, and there's just a list of some more that I found. So just by going to this single web page with IE6 and not having all the security patches in place will infect your computer with more than a dozen different components of malware. That's pretty much worrisome. But why are people doing that? Why would somebody want to infect a company computer or a private computer? And the reason is very simple. They can make money with that, because they can steal information that they can sell in the Internet Underground. This is a list of prices found in the Internet Underground by Symantec. It was published in April 2008. So for example, if you get hold on a bank account, you can get between $10 and $1,000 for this information by selling it to somebody on the Internet Underground market. Or if you get hold on credit card information, including expiry date and CVC code, you can sell it for up to $20. Or even if you steal a full identity, like mother's maiden names, address, phone number, social security number, you can sell it between $1 and $15. Or if you just steal an email password and somebody can misuse an email account afterwards, you can get between $4 and $30 on the black market. That's quite surprising. So stealing a single password can give the attacker up to $30. And apparently this is why it's worthwhile for them to pursue those attacks and download Trojans on other people's computers. However, there's a second thing that many web browsers are not really aware of. So looking at this website here, which is an interesting forum about cats, people can post their comments, what they have concerns about with their cats, for example, and post their images of the cute little cats that they have. It's very much user-driven, this website. However, looking at how much control the webmaster actually has, it has to be said that he has very little control over what's actually showing up on this website, because he uses third-party content. Let's illustrate this a little bit. So here we have an advertisement, which normally means that this advertisement comes from some third-party web server. Now, if nobody does screening of the security, of possible security breaches in the ad, then this could lead to an exploit of the user's browser. So you better choose a trusted partner. For example, Google AdSense will screen each and any content uploaded to us, which will then later on be shown to a user through the advertisement system. So anything that an advertiser wants to show will first be pre-screened. However, there are other systems where some advertisement companies or agencies can directly put in their content and serve it directly to the user without it being screened through some third-party system or through the ad system. This can be very dangerous if the security is not guaranteed, and only one of them might not be trustworthy of the partners. Furthermore, there's user-contributed content like forum messages in text or images. And in any of those, a malicious user, which is not really interested in cats, but more about exploiting the users of this forum, could potentially inject some malware code, which would then execute on the user side. So it's very important for the webmaster of this site to actually sanitize all the user input and make also sure it's properly encoded before it's actually put into the website and distributed to other users. And finally, there's many widgets, like a visitor counter, where websites pulling JavaScript dynamically from third-party websites, they then get executed in the user context inside of the browser, and then will show some nice imagery, for example, as here, the number of user visitors that came to this page before. Now, at any one day, it could be because you pull this script from some third-party server that maybe this script is modified and does do a little more than just page counting or visitor counting. And it could happen that, for example, it also, in addition to showing this nice image, it will carry some exploit code and attack the user. This has happened with some script that we've traced. So in this case, you better make sure that you actually get a license for this code to check, to run it from your own server, and make sure you check it for security breaches before you put it on your server. Because if you always pull it in dynamically, which basically means the user downloads it from the third-party website, you have no control as a webmaster over whether the content of the widget will be the same as you have seen before. So these are just 3 examples of third-party content in website. If any of those turn malicious, then the user of the website will be attacked. And it's very special in a sense that the webmaster doesn't really notice, because this content is downloaded only to the user and not actually to the web server of the webmaster. So he must really have a trust relationship with all those sources where he pulls in additional scripts and information into his website, or rather channel it through his own server. So Google is tracking malicious URLs by crawling the web. And once we find a malicious URL, we will put it in our database, and later on warn the user that we know of some websites that they are actually carrying malicious code. And we've been doing this for more than a year, and we have about 3 million web URLs that we know that if you go there with an old version, specifically like IE6 and with all the patches installed, that you can easily be a victim of a drive-by download. What is a drive-by download? Basically, when you go and visit a website, it's something that happens in the background without any noticeable warning to the user, and it installs some software while you're visiting the page. You don't need to click anything. You just need to type the URL or visit the website, and then in the background you will get some malware installed. And once we know that the URL is malicious, or we even know a full domain is malicious because there's many such URLs on it, we will put up a warning in the search results page. So if you search for some specific keywords or even for URLs, you might find the warning, this URL may harm your computer. Or in German, as in the screenshot, diese Webseite kann Ihren Computer beschädigen, which means the same. And of course, if you click on that, you'll get another page of warnings from Google telling you you better don't go there because we do know you can get infected. We don't block it. We don't take it out from our index because we don't want to censor. However, we still want to warn the user that there might be something really bad happening on this page. It's quite worrisome. Even though you say 3 million URLs might not be too much if you have billions of web pages out there, it's quite worrisome to see the exposure of such malicious URLs for the users of the Google search engine. If we look at the Google search queries in January 2008, we find that for 1.3% of all search queries that were done in January 2008, there was at least one malicious URL in the search results. So this means there's quite a large exposure, even though it is a small amount of websites that are malicious. They apparently seem to get indexed. They seem to be on web pages where people find relevant information, so that's why they're in the search results. And if it's 1 to 3% of all search queries that result to have at least one malicious URL, there is quite a high chance of people actually navigating to those pages. That's why we need those warnings. Some people say, I will never get exposed to such malicious websites because I'm a safe server. I will never go to, for example, websites that contain adult content. So this was maybe true 5 years ago, where maybe adult content websites were more exposed to malicious activity than others. However, this is no longer true today. So what you see here is some histogram that tells of all those 3 million malicious URLs that Google knows about, which content category do they belong into? So basically, what's the fraction of suspicious or malware URLs within each content category out there? And while you see on the very left that adult content is maybe twice as exposed, so there are twice as many pages that are either suspicious or have malware on them, you also find such malicious websites in the content category of finance, of games, industries, online communities, business, entertainment, computers, telecommunication, even real estate, society, shopping, automotive, or animals. Web pages do actually be malicious. And this is pretty bad if they are malicious, because you wouldn't expect that basically any website could be malicious, because once you have this feeling that the web page looks like trustworthy, nowadays does no longer mean that it is for sure not infected. So just claiming that you're a safe surfer by not going to adult content websites, this is a really bad strategy today, so you better actually make sure you have the latest version of the browser and all security measures in place. So let's look at a study understanding the web browser threat. So we did this study over 18 months, and we looked at anonymized Google data to find out how many internet users surf the web without the latest fully patched browser version. So this is joint work with Stefan Frey from ETH Zurich and Gunter Ullmann from IBM Security Systems in USA, and also Martin May from ETH. And the paper can be found at techzoom.net/insecurity-iceberg. So first of all, we wanted to know which web browsers are in daily use. So if you look at all the 1.408 billion internet users worldwide, according to Internet World Statistics, there's 1.4 billion internet users. What's the fraction of them using which browser? And there were about 41.1% using Internet Explorer 7. Another 37.2% use also Internet Explorer, but not in the latest version, IE7. I say the latest version IE7 because IE8 is not yet publicly out there, only in beta. And then there is 16.1% Firefox users, and 3.4% Safari users, another 0.8% Opera users, and finally 1.4% others, which can, for example, be user agents of mobile phones or other not so well-known browsers. So basically, the take-home message from this slide is that most people use Internet Explorer, either IE7 or another version of IE. And then there's the 16% of Firefox users. So we need to be aware of those users in the first place and find out, are they having, have they updated the latest version or not? So we will specifically look at built-in browsers code, basically vulnerabilities built into the main browser code, which means we don't really look at plugins. Plugins is additional code that is brought into execution through the browser. However, we don't really regard them in this study. We just looked at the main core browser without any plugins and wanted to know, is the browser code vulnerable because there are known vulnerability leaks in it that might not be fixed in the version that users are using. As I said, there are more possibilities for vulnerabilities, like in the plugins, like Flash, Java, or QuickTime, and several of them got reported, but this would be the topic of a different study. So if the vendor learns about the vulnerability, of course, he's interested in fixing it, and this is also the case for the main browser version, of course. Now you ask yourself, was there anything interesting that was found as a security vulnerability in the browsers? And of course there was. So we look at 18 months of data from January 1st, 2007 to June 2nd, 2008. And Secunio has a a long list of vulnerabilities that got reported for specific browser versions. So we just look at the latest major version here. And for IE 7.x in these 18 months, there were several vulnerabilities reported, 2 of which were extremely critical in the rating by Secunia. Another 8 of them were highly critical. And this was about 36% of all reported vulnerabilities for IE 7.x. So this basically means that if any of those either extremely critical or highly critical vulnerabilities are still in your browser while you go to a website, it's pretty easy for the website, if it's modified, to attack you. Because most of those vulnerabilities actually are exploitable from remote. Furthermore, for Firefox 2.0.x, there were 9 highly critical vulnerabilities reported. There were no extremely critical vulnerabilities reported for Firefox 2.0.x. However, if you have 9 highly critical vulnerabilities, it still means that you can get exploited from remote in most cases because, as I said, virtually a very large fraction, normally more than 80% of them, were actually remotely exploitable. For Safari 3.x, there were just 2 highly critical vulnerabilities reported because apparently there's not so much that gets reported for Safari. It doesn't mean that Safari is more secure, it just means that less vulnerabilities were discovered and reported. And there's Opera 9.x. And there, in the last 18 months of our study, there were 7 highly critical vulnerabilities reported. Now, this is just how much got reported, so how much got fixed of that. And you see the statistics in the table at the bottom of this slide. For Internet Explorer 7.x, there were still like 6 vulnerabilities open, which were in the category 3 of them not critical, another 3 of them less critical. For Firefox 2.0.x, there were 2 vulnerabilities still open, not patched, in the category not critical. And for Safari 3.x, on June 2nd, there was still 1 less critical vulnerability open. Whereas for Opera 9.x, it seems they really fixed everything. There was no single vulnerability still open on June 2nd, 2008. So how did we do this study to find out about who's using which browser version? And the way we did that was by looking at the HTTP user agent header field. And so this is a text string that gets sent by a web browser to any website that the web browser is about to visit. So when the web browser goes to google.com, it will send us the string identifying himself to be a specific browser type and also giving the version of the browser, including also the operating system and other information. So this is sent each time to any site, not just to Google. So any webmaster can basically collect this information in the web logs. So we did so over 18 months, from January 1st, 2007 to June 2nd, 2008. And if you can see, for user agent Firefox, for example, you get the full version string. So here, you see it's 2.0.0.14. So this includes also the minor version. This is very helpful because this gives us the full patch level of Firefox. For Internet Explorer, here you see this is in Microsoft Internet Explorer 7.0 that was requesting the page. However, you don't really see any minor version number or any patch level. So this is because Microsoft decided not to report this in the user agent string. So with Microsoft IE, we just know which of the browsers are in which major version. So we need some additional information to find out about who has the latest patch level. OK, so what did we have to do furthermore to make our study give these results, to count who is using not the latest version? So we looked at each day. So we always took 1 day of data. And we needed to make sure that we don't double count if the same browser comes again and again on the same website that belongs to Google, where we got the data from. So we looked at the preferences cookie, and if the same preferences cookie would come again, we just say, oh, we've seen this before, so we only count the very first visit. So this is necessary because otherwise heavily active users which would come again and again would have a much heavier weight in the statistics. You just wanted to know the number of unique installations and how the fractions of different browser versions within the unique installations would look like. Furthermore, we only looked at weekdays because we found that on the weekends, the statistics differ. Apparently, business users have some different preferences over browser types and browser versions than home users have on the weekends. So we just restrict ourselves to weekdays. And our focus again was on the dynamics of major and minor version numbers of the actual browser. So we didn't look at plugins here. And finally, we say the latest browser is also the most secure browser because, first of all, the more recent browsers have most known vulnerabilities fixed. So this is certainly true, that if the vendor learns that he will actually fix it and issue a new version, which normally increases the version number. On the other side, later major versions of the browser typically have additional security features which older major versions lack. So this gives increased security for the user as well. Even though it was not a security hole, it's more like an extended security feature that is now present. So if you have the latest version, you actually can use that. There's some controversy whether IE7, Internet Explorer 7, is the most secure Internet Explorer, or whether older versions like IE5 and IE6 are at least as secure as IE7. Because they are still supported by Microsoft, which means that they will still bug fix them. Let's maybe speak Sandi Hardmeier, a Microsoft professional, who said in 2008, there are dangers that simply didn't exist back in 2001 when Internet Explorer 6 was released to the world. Internet Explorer 7 makes surfing the web fundamentally safer by offering greater protection against viruses, spyware, and other online risks. So he says because there are additional features and protection against viruses and spyware and online risks, it's more inherently safer. So what are those new features? IE7 has new security features like the phishing filter, which will make the address bar red if IE knows that this website is used for phishing. So this immediately alerts the user once he goes to this website. So he will be less incented to actually click on it because the browser tells him, or maybe enter personal information, because the browser tells him that there might be some danger with this website. And then in addition, they have extended certificate validation, which will also be visible to the user, such that if the certificate of the website is not like of a high security standard, then the user will be informed. And finally, they have an opt-in for add-ons, which means that ActiveX plugins will not just be enabled, but the user has to specifically choose so, which makes it inherently more secure. So if you're still a user of IE5 or IE6, you will be lacking those features, which means you don't have the full security that you could have if you used the latest version of IE, which is IE7 at the time of the study. So now looking at our measurement data, what did we find about the use of major versions, specifically about the fraction of users within each browser family that were using the latest major version. So looking at Firefox 2, which was the latest major version at the time of the study, Firefox 3 came out just 2 weeks after the study ended. So Firefox 2, you can see of all the Firefox users, more than 40% were using Firefox major version 2 at the beginning of the study in January 2007. And this was increasing rapidly, so people were migrating for Firefox 1 or 1.5 up to Firefox 2 rather rapidly, as you can see. Specifically at the end of the support for Firefox 1.5, you see some jump of people that were just now actually finally going up to Firefox 2 because they knew they would no longer get the security updates. And then when the first security vulnerability was found in Firefox 2 and actually also fixed, so the patch happened on July 17th, there was no patch offered for Firefox 1.5 because it was end of life, end of support. And there many people actually jumped to just actually choose to use Firefox version 2 and abandon their old installations of Firefox 1.5, as you can see. And it reached a quite high level of users migrating to the latest version for the major version. Then for i7, you also see there's a steady migration to i7. So users update or upgrade, I would say, from older versions to i7. However, it's a pretty slow process. There's like no big jumps. It's just very steadily increasing, and users migrate to i7. And for Opera 9, because it was already out there for some longer time, you see a pretty high fraction of users also that actually have migrated to Opera 9. So it's more than, yeah, as you see, more than 80% that had Opera 9 for the observation period. And then finally, there's Safari 3. Almost nobody used Safari 3 at the beginning of the study. And then when Mac OS Tiger 10.4.10 came out on June 20th, 2007, there was a big jump of users that were now using Safari in version 3 because it came basically bundled with the operating system. And there's another rather big jump when Mac OS Leopard 10.5.0 came out on October 16th, so in 2007, because then Safari 3 got out of beta. And it was also included with Mac OS Tiger on November 14th, and there is, I've seen another big increase of users of Safari 3. So apparently bundling the browser with the new release of an operating system makes many people jump to the newer major versions, as you see here. Now we can look at each of these browsers and find out like what was the maximum share that we have seen of users using the latest major version. So why do we look at the maximum? Because we want to know like what is the exposure of users, and this is like a very careful estimate. So if you look at the maximum of users that were secure, we can give some bounds to our problem. So here, for Internet Explorer, we have found that only 52.5% of all Internet Explorer users were actually ever using i7 over those 18 months. So there were never more than 52.5% that were using i7 on any single day of our study, which was a work day. And for Firefox, there were a surprising 92.2% of Firefox users which were using Firefox 2. So it seems like almost everybody has updated to the latest major version in these 18 months. And for Safari 3, there were about 70.2% that have upgraded to Safari 3 from other versions. This is still, again, the maximum, but as you've seen from the curve, it's towards the end of our observation period for all of the browsers where we have seen the maximum. So the end of our observation period was, as you can see, in the end of June 2008. Beginning of June 2008. And for Opera, 90.1% have actually upgraded to Opera 9, which is a pretty nice result. So if you get 9 out of 10 users to use the latest major version, I think people that use the browser really are aware that the latest major version is the best version that they can get. Now, we want to go one step further and find out who's using actually the latest major version, including all the minor version patches or all the security patches, as we can say. So this means that the fraction of users you see here will, of course, decrease because some of them don't have all the security patches installed. And this is what we found. So it jumps down a little for Internet Explorer from the 52.5% i7 major version user. This comes down to 47.6% of all I users that actually not only use the latest version i7, but also have all the security updates installed. Now, as I said before, from the user agent string, we didn't see the minor versions. So how can we be confident that this percentage is now accurate that we give for those that have all the latest security patches installed? So the way we did that was we looked at numbers from Secunia PSI, the Personal Software Inspector, which is a tool for Windows, which is used by several 100,000 users, that reports which of the users that uses this tool actually has which version and whether the version is secure or not. Secure means the latest version with all the patches. And so we looked at this data, and they also have the same data for Firefox and Safari and Opera, where we had the full version information, so we could compare the Secunia numbers against ours. And we found that because Secunia users, they have to actively install this program and actively scan for vulnerabilities, they might be more security aware, but there's some bias in the population of those using it. We found that comparing to our numbers, which of course looks at the average user, we have about twice as high a fraction of users that were not patched compared to the Secunia numbers. And so we could just scale this up for IE to make sure that we have the same scaling for security for users that don't have all the security patches installed. So this brought us from 52.5% of all IE users that use IE7 down to 47.6% of all IE users that have not just IE7 but also all the security patches. Now for Firefox, you see it jumps down from 92.2% that have Firefox 2 to 83.3% that have Firefox 2 and all the security patches installed. And then for Safari, it jumps down from 70.2% that have Safari 3 to 65.3%, which have Safari 3 including all the security patches. And very interestingly for Opera users, we have seen 90.1% Opera 9 users. So most Opera users actually use the latest version for the major version of Opera. However, it jumps down to 56.1% of Opera users that have not just the latest version number in the major version, Opera 9, but also all the security patches installed, which we can see from the minor versions. So apparently, people just update once to the next major version and then stick with the version they downloaded, and they don't do any more updates of the minor versions. And that's quite worrisome. So apparently people believe they are secure because they have updated to the latest major version of Opera, which some people say is a very secure browser. That's why they maybe think that they only have to update to major versions. However, looking at the statistics and the reports for the releases, we see that Opera was mostly fixing vulnerabilities regarding security in the minor versions, which is very unfortunate if you don't update them to the next minor version. And it also depends, of course, on how the updates are applied. So for Internet Explorer, the updates are applied through the operating system, through the update mechanism of the operating system. So this happens once a month. So if there's anything found regarding a security vulnerability, the attacker will have about 30 days at least until there's the next patch coming out and being distributed through the Microsoft updates. However, this also makes sure, because the update is done through the operating system, if somebody gets the operating system updates, he also gets updated the Internet Explorer browser. For Firefox, each time you start a browser, or also in regular intervals, the browser will check whether there's a new version on the servers and then show you a message, and with a single click you can install the update. So that's a very simple process, and because it's checked so often, basically several times a day, you will actually be sure that as soon as there's a new bug fix out there that fixes a security vulnerability, you will get notified and you can get the latest version. So this seems to be very, very effective. For Safari, it's done through the Apple operating system updater. Also there, you can basically pick and choose your own schedule, and then alongside with updating the operating system, also the browser will get updated. Apparently not everybody has enabled that. And finally for Opera, it also checks when you start the browser whether there's a new version, and then you will get the pop-up dialog basically asking you to visit the website, download the browser, install it yourself and everything. So there's more than about 5 clicks that you need, at least, maybe even 8. I haven't counted them. But it's a much more tedious process because you need to go to the website yourself, download it yourself, launch the downloaded executable yourself, and then finally replace the old version with the new one. Whereas with Firefox, it's just one click and everything is done automatically. There's no like downloading, finding the file again, and launching it. It's much more simple. So maybe Opera should switch over to using the Firefox update mechanism, which is just a single click, to get more people to update to the latest minor version. So summarizing the results of the study, we found that basically we can measure the tip of the iceberg where we have internet users that use insecure versions, or I would call them rather not the latest, most secure version of the browsers. And we found about 5 million Opera users that don't use the latest major version and all the security patches applied. And we find another 17 million Safari users which don't use the latest, most secure browser. And another 38 million Firefox users which don't use the latest, most secure browser. And we also found a big chunk of Internet Explorer users. There were about 577 million Internet users which don't use the latest, most secure browser. However, that's just the tip of the iceberg of Internet users that are at risk due to not updating to the most secure web browser. Hidden below the surface, which we don't see of this iceberg, are those that use plugins that are having a security vulnerability. Because we didn't measure that, we can't give an estimate here. So summing up all those numbers, we found that 637 million Internet users, or about 45 to 2% of all Internet users worldwide, they surf the web without the latest, most secure browser version. That's a very large number. 637 million users, or 45 to 2% of Internet users, that don't use the latest version, and they are potentially at risk of getting attacked by malicious websites. So if you happen to use a browser which is not the latest version, you might want to consider updating. So just again, our study. What did we do? So basically we looked at the global share of browsers in percent. So how many people were using IE7, how many were using Firefox, Safari, and Opera. And then we found out the total usage number worldwide by looking at how many users there are. So we just first had the relative shares of which fraction of users is using which browser. And by knowing that there's this 1.408 billion Internet users worldwide, we could scale this up to the whole Internet. And given that our data source, which were Google websites, like Google Search and others that Google has, we have a very interesting and broad user base. We can easily scale this up because we have seen a very large fraction of Internet users already in our data. And then we found out by looking at the user agent string, what's the fraction of those browser users that don't use the most secure version. So you see the numbers here. So looking at those numbers, we found that in total, 45 to 2% of all Internet users were not using the latest, most secure version, or as I said before, 637 million Internet users were not using the most secure and latest browser version. We published this report, and we got a lot of media coverage in Europe. This is mostly in German, those references here. So we were in all major newspapers, I would say. We were even in the radio. And we also got covered in US, like in the Register, on/dot, PC World, About.com, Satinet, CNET News, USA Today, the Tech Herald, Security Forum, Security Focus, Washington Post, and Ars Technica, or also on Schneier's blog about security, where he referenced our paper as an excellent paper, because it actually measures the insecurity in the population of the users of the Internet in a very passive way, so it's not intrusive, and it gives some interesting numbers because it is looking at a very large fraction of users. So after we have released the study, we got, of course, many excuses for those 637 million users that don't use the latest, most secure version. So what did they say? Why they don't update to the latest, most secure version? Some home users wrote, like, I have nothing on my system that one could possibly steal. Who would ever attack me? So apparently they were not aware that they might be using credit cards or even just email passwords that other users would like to steal and sell on the Internet underground. So you don't need to be a bank to be attractive to get attacked nowadays. Others said, I only serve to safe websites, never to XXX sites. And as we've seen before, malicious websites, they distribute over a large range of content categories, not just to adult content. And another one said, I use Windows 98 and IE5. No hacker cares about such old systems. While maybe nobody really cares about updating old systems, I wouldn't say that hackers don't really care about old systems because they're much better known and much easier to exploit than newer systems. And another one said, I don't want to upgrade to the next major version of the browser as I don't want to learn a new user interface. That's a very good point. So especially with IE7 or IE8, some people hesitate to update because the user interface is so different from older versions, which means the user has to learn again how to use the browser. And it's very unfortunate that here the user interface update is coupled with the security update. From corporate users, we heard statements like this: we can't upgrade because of our internet applications because they are incompatible with Internet Explorer 7. So they need to stick with IE6 or IE5 just because their intranet has an old application. That's extremely unfortunate, looking at the risk that you get infected if you use the same old browsers on the actual internet. So maybe in this place it would be a very good thing to either use two different browsers, one for intranet and one for the internet, or instead maybe upgrade the internet application such that it can also work with the newer browsers. Another one said, I can't upgrade to the latest Internet Explorer 7 because I use Windows 2000 and it's not supported by IE7. That's pretty unfortunate. So for actually having IE7 installed, you need Windows XP with the service specs. And if you don't have that, you will actually never be able to install it. So this kind of forces you to also upgrade the operating system to get the latest, most secure browser. And that's pretty bad for the user because unless he purchases the next version of the operating system, he will never get the full security. So what could we do of making users more aware that their browser is actually not up to date, and actually there might be a risk that they're using an old version? So one idea we came up with is we could have a best used before date for browsers, similar to what they use in the food industry. So it says on the food package that you better eat it before the expiry date because otherwise you don't know whether the quality of the food will still be okay or whether you get sick if you eat it. So by just having such a date, basically it would mean for browsers, they come out, we don't know the date yet, but as soon as the first security vulnerability comes out, the browser then could start to show this expiry date in the form that, oh, actually, this browser is expired for so and so many days, and you've missed so and so many security patches. So the concept is similar, however, we don't know it in advance. We just know it once the security update comes out. But if the browser would check for security updates anyway, it could just show this visual warning to the user and then let him update with a single click. And of course, if you still want to surf the web, you can do so. So we wouldn't block users, of course. But you should be aware that you might be at risk if you do still use the old version. And so you could either have this in the browser, or you could also put this on websites. For example, as in the screenshot here, it could be put on Wikipedia, because if you send the version number of the user agent to the website, as you do each time you request a website, it could just go do a lookup whether this is the latest browser, and then show you this warning. However, there's some trouble here with Internet Explorer because it only sends you the major version and it doesn't send you minor version information or information about the patch levels. So for a very large fraction of internet users, this wouldn't actually work. So that's very unfortunate, and I personally think it would be better if the browser sends the full version string, because then you could show such warnings and make users more aware. And in addition, I don't think that this will give attackers an advantage. Because nowadays they just try a series of exploits such that they can cover your version. Whereas in the future they, of course, could just use a single exploit that is targeted exactly to your IE version because they have the full version string. But overall, whether you get like a couple of exploits which then will actually hit you, or if you just get a single exploit, that doesn't really matter if you anyway have a fast uplink. Because finally you will get hit anyway. Okay, let's now look at the different side. Let's look at the vendors. How well are they doing in terms of patching the systems once that they learn about security vulnerabilities? And specifically, I want to look at the metric called the 0-day patch metric, which will tell on how fast vendors like Microsoft or Apple actually are fixing their systems. So this is based on a research paper published at the Black Hat conference in Europe. And this is work by my research colleague, Stefan Frey from ETH Zurich, together with Bernhard Tellenbach and Bernhard Plattner. And you can also find the paper online at techzoom.net/risk. So traditional statistics about patching, they look just at the number of unpatched vulnerabilities on a given day, and then over some time period. And then the more unpatched vulnerabilities a vendor has, the worse it will be. Now, of course, we can do so for Microsoft here. So starting 2002, there's this time series graph up to 2008, where you see the number of unpatched vulnerabilities that are known and which are medium or highly critical for Microsoft products. And you see how the statistics evolve over time, and they rarely ever hit 20 vulnerabilities, as you can see. So most of the time, it's below 20 vulnerabilities on any day that were known and that were unpatched. However, you see some interesting patterns here. So we see that the number of unpatched vulnerabilities increases over more than a year in some cases if Microsoft is working on a service pack. Like if you see, for example, in 2002, there was Service Pack 1 for Windows XP released on September 9th, 2002. And just before it was released, the number of vulnerabilities climbed from a few to more than 10. And the same happened again when Microsoft was working on Windows XP Service Pack 2, which was released on August 6, 2004. So the number of unpatched vulnerabilities was just climbing up and up before they finally could release this service pack. So apparently, the engineering resources were bound to work on the service pack, and they couldn't actually release bug fixes while they were working on the service pack. And you see this for other versions as well. So we can do the same for Apple. How many unpatched vulnerabilities do they have on any day from 2002 to 2008? And you see here some slightly different patterns. So they had quite often more than 20 unpatched vulnerabilities on any day that we looked at. And if you look at the trend, you would say that actually the number of unpatched vulnerabilities is still increasing if you look over the whole time window. And that's kind of worrisome. So whereas Microsoft can keep it more or less below the threshold of 20 unpatched vulnerabilities a day, Apple seems not to be able to cope with the new vulnerabilities reported because they might work on different products or they just don't have enough engineering resources to actually deal with them. And so you also see some interesting artifacts here that, for example, while they were working on OS X 10.4 Tiger release, which was in on April 29, 2005, it seems also that the engineering resources were kind of focused on that, such that they couldn't fix reported vulnerabilities, and so they climbed up from a little less than 10 to almost to more than 30 over the time while they were working on Mac OS X 10.4 Tiger. And you can also see with the iPhone release, which was in June 29, 2007, before that, there was also a large increase of vulnerabilities reported, which didn't get fixed immediately. So however, those statistics are not extremely interesting because it means if no vulnerability gets reported, then the vendors look fine. So maybe we should look at different statistics. So here, just in comparison again, the number of unpatched vulnerabilities for Apple versus Microsoft. So you see, Microsoft was almost always below 20 unpatched vulnerabilities a day over the time interval from 2002 to 2008. And Apple had this increasing trend of having more and more vulnerabilities not patched, which were more than 20 in the last years a day. Okay, now let's look on this different metric because we really want to see on how well they're dealing with that. So we want to know, like, once they learn about vulnerability, how long does it take them to fix it? Because the faster the turnaround is, the better they do a job of making sure that the users are not at risk. So the study looks at empirical data from Microsoft and Apple and just at high and medium risk vulnerabilities that were discovered in the years 2002 up to 2007 and that were also patched in this period. It doesn't look at unpatched vulnerabilities. So a security patch basically is just a piece of software that will eliminate a vulnerability once it is installed. And the high and medium risk, this was chosen as a criteria because actually the vulnerability should be for a real security problem that poses the user at risk and not just to like a non-critical, should not be a non-critical vulnerability. And so what is a zero-day patch? Zero-day patch basically means that on the same date as the vulnerability was disclosed, the patch was also released. So the gap between release date of the patch and vulnerability disclosure date is 0 days. So how can this be? How can a vendor fix the vulnerability on the very same day it gets reported? It can only be, normally only be if actually the vendor gets advance notice. There was no public disclosure yet, but the vendor already knows. And once he has the patch, he actually releases the patch together with disclosing the vulnerability. So, and here we can look at Microsoft from, again, 2002 to 2008. How fast are they patching? And so what is done in this graph is the following. It looks at all the patches that were available, looking at this for each day of the interval of the observation. And it looks at what's the fraction of patches that were available on the same day, up to 30 days after the disclosure, up to 90 days after the disclosure of the vulnerability, or up to 180 days after the vulnerability disclosure. And so now we can basically say something about the speed of how fast that the vendor, in this case, Microsoft, is fixing reported vulnerabilities. And quite surprising, in 2003, about 60% of all patches that got available were zero-day patches. So they basically disclosed the vulnerability on the same date as the patch. And this is quite good if 60% of them get patched, because if nobody else than just the vendor and the security researcher that found the bug knew about it, no one could actually exploit it because you immediately get the patch. And if you also install it on the same day, then you're pretty well protected against attacks for those vulnerabilities. However, there's 40% other vulnerabilities which were apparently not fixed on the very same day as they got known. And so you can look at the 30-day performance, the 90-day performance, and the 180-day performance. And so you see for like 30-day performance, it's a little more than 70% of all the patches that got fixed within 30 days. For looking at the time interval of up to 90 days after disclosure of the vulnerability, it's around 90%. So how it has changed over time, for example, when Microsoft was working on Windows XP Service Pack 2, which came out on 6th of August 2004, you see how the zero-day patch rate drops significantly, up to 40%, down to 40%. And so it seems that engineering resources were so focused on bringing out this service pack that they didn't actually fix vulnerability that they got reported, and then they got disclosed somewhere, of course, and then they still didn't have a patch out there. So that's quite sad that users have to wait much longer for patches while Microsoft is working for a big service pack. Because in that time, there's this vulnerability window which attackers can actually use to do attacks using those vulnerabilities. And then later on, it came up again. Apparently, they had finished working on those service packs. And then the zero-day patch fraction came up to 60% and more again. And it also seems that more recent, in 2007, they did a better and better job, such that the zero-day patch fraction actually did climb up again to more than 70%. So overall, it seems that Microsoft is doing a better and better job at fixing vulnerabilities fast. Now let's look at Apple. Also for the time interval of 2002 up to the year 2000 and including 2007, what's the zero-day patch rate that they have? So quite surprisingly, in 2003, they had no patch that they fixed on the very first day until later in 2003, where they started to apparently fix stuff on the very same day as it got disclosed. So this means they got advance notice of it and actually were also fixing it. And in 2004, this was climbing up a lot, up to 40% of vulnerabilities got fixed on the same day as the vulnerability got disclosed. So they were doing a better and better job, apparently. However, when they got busy with working on Mac OS X Tiger, which was released in April 2005, until that, it seems they were very, very busy with this operating system update, so they couldn't really fix everything immediately anymore. And then the zero-day patch rate came down. More recently, 2006 and 2007, the zero-day patch fraction, so all the patches that got available on the same day as the vulnerability, climbed up to more than 60%. However, more recently, again, in late 2007, it came down to about 40 to 50% again. Apparently, we're so busy with working on the iPhone. So it seems that major innovations done by a company like Apple, they bind so much engineering resources such that security gets more and more neglected while people are working on the new innovation. So that puts users certainly at risk because the interval or the time in which an attacker actually can exploit a vulnerability, which is already known in the public, gets larger and larger towards the release of a new innovative product. So hopefully they increase again to more than 60% with the zero-day. But from the trend, it's not really clear because it seems to come in waves, and each time there's a new innovation coming up, the resources get bound so much for working on the innovation, and they get no longer used for fixing vulnerabilities. So comparing Apple and Microsoft, we can see that it really seems that Microsoft does a pretty good job in fixing stuff very early and also respond very fast to security researchers that report security vulnerabilities, whereas Apple has these interesting waves where they might know about vulnerabilities, but they don't actually work on fixing it. And hopefully this gets better in the future. So thanks a lot for your attention. If you want to read the full study about understanding the web browser threat, you can find the paper at techzoom.net/insecurity-iceberg. And you can reach me at thomas@diebendorfer.ch. Okay, thanks a lot for your attention.